Hi, I'm Chad with Wood-Mizer, and today I would like to walk you through some of the basic setups of our Moulder planers. I have our MP260 here with us today, and I'm going to be going over how to change out the top cutting knives. Now please note, this process will be the same for the MP160, MP180, MP200, the MP260, and the MP360. Now, these will be the tools that you're going to need to do this, and these tools come with the machine. Your 4mm Allen wrench, the 10mm wrench that comes with it to release the wedge, and then your knife setting block, and you'll also need your replacement 410mm knife for the MP260, and for the MP360 it'll be a 510mm knife. Now also note, the steps on how to do this are detailed in the manual that comes with the machine. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to release the wedge so we can pull out the knife, and you're going to need your 10mm wrench to do that. So we're going to break loose all 6 of these bolts in here, and as we go down through here, as we release this, this will allow this wedge to start to slide, so then we can pull it out. Now with the wedge loosened, we're going to go ahead and unscrew the bolts here that hold the knife into place. All right, now that we have this completely unscrewed and the wedge loosened, now we should be able to remove the knife. Make sure we don't lose the screws there, because you're going to need those for when you replace for the new knife. Now that we have our old knife out, now it's time to put the new one in. As you see here on this knife, we have our indentions here and here, and this is where the set screws go to allow you to adjust the height of this knife once it's installed. On the 410mm knife and the 300mm knife, there's indentions here and here that you'll use to adjust the height of the knife. On the MP360, these indentions are not used. So when you take the knife out, it's always good also to remove the wedge, and that way you can make sure you can get all the dirt or sawdust, anything that's down in there, make sure you get that removed before you put the new knife back in. All right, we'll get the wedge put back in first. And then we'll go ahead and get our screws pre-started in here, just to kind of have them set there. Because if you go ahead and screw them in, you won't be able to get the knife in, because they have to sit into these grooves first. So when you install this knife, you want to make sure the head of your set screw lines up with your notch in your knife. Once you get that close, you can go ahead and knock that over so it hits in the notch. And then you can go ahead and start screwing them down, and that'll start lowering the knife. All right, now that we've got our set screws into place, into the notches of the knife, we're going to go ahead and start screwing down our set screws. We want to go ahead and get this knife pretty low down to its lowest point, and then come back up when we're using our setting block. Now you want to go kind of back and forth when you do this, because if you go down on one side all the way, you'll get it wedged in there. Now that we have the knife installed at its lowest point, now we need to use our knife setting block to get the right height that the knife should be at during operation. Please note the MP360 has a different tool than this, but looks very similar because the knife is set at a slightly different height than the other units. So now that we've got our setting block on here, what you're going to want to do is you're going to slightly want to move this block back and forth a little bit, as you start to raise up this knife, because you want to make sure that knife kind of hits right in the center of that block. And as you start to move this back and forth, you'll feel it. As soon as it hits, it'll stop. And that's where you want to set your knife at. And then you'll want to repeat it on the opposite side of the cutting head. That way you can guarantee that the knife's at the same point on both sides of the cutting head. We are now starting to make contact with that knife right about there. Now that we got that side done, now we're going to move it over to this side and do the same thing. All right, so before you lock in your wedge, you just want to make sure that you double check that you've got it hitting at the same spot on both sides of the cutting head. All right, so I'm close. When you go and set this, you want to make sure you get it the same on both sides. Now what I'm doing on my block here, I'm aligning this little rounded curve edge with the screw cutout for the knife. That way I can guarantee it's the same on both sides. Or the other thing you can do is you could draw a line on your block. That way you can visually see the line on the block. On each time you do this, you can set it to the line on the block or find something on the head itself to align it with. Now that we have the knife height set, now all we have left to do is to tighten the wedge up to hold the knife into place. All right, so now we're going to go back through here and tighten all 6 of the bolts up to make sure we got this knife held into place just where we set it at. Now that we have the wedge tightened up and the knife is in place, now we need to rotate and repeat this process for the second knife. Now that we're going to change out the bottom knife on an MP260. Now this process will be the same on an MP360. The only difference is going to be the MP360 is going to have a 410 millimeter bottom knife and the MP260 is going to have a 300 millimeter bottom knife. Now in order to do this, we do have to remove the fences on the inside to get access to be able to change out the knife. The tools needed to change out the bottom knives are a straight edge, a 10 millimeter wrench, a 4 millimeter Allen wrench, a 6 millimeter Allen wrench, and your replacement knives. In order to remove the fences out of the unit, you will need to lower the main cutting table. All right, so I'm going to remove this Allen screw here. I'm going to remove this entire fence out of the unit. Now we're going to release the Allen screws here and over here to remove the side fence out of the way. Now with all 4 Allen screws removed, you can now remove the fence. So next we're going to loosen the screws for the wedge, and there's 5 of those. So we're going to break those loose, so then we can remove the knife out of the cutting head. Now that we have the wedge loosened, we now can unscrew our setting screws to raise up the knife, so then we can take it out. Now that we have the set screws loosened all the way, we can now remove the knife from the cutting head. Now that the knife's out, you also want to make sure you remove your wedge and make sure you clean out any debris that's up underneath of that wedge. That way you can guarantee that your knife will be setting in there straight when you go to put your new knife in. Now that I've got all the debris removed, we're going to slide in our wedge first, get that into place. When we go and put in the bottom knife, same as the top cutter on the MP260, you're going to have your notches in your knife that you're going to have to line your set screws up with. When we go and insert this knife, we want to make sure that we get the head of our screws in the notches of the knife. Once you have the knife in its lowest position, you'll need to take your straight edge and you're going to put it on the fixed side of the table, not the adjustable side where your plates are removed for the depth of cut for your bottom cutter. Once you have your straight edge set up, you'll then will adjust your knife so it just comes up enough to touch the top of the straight edge. And then once that's done, you'll move it over to the opposite side and do the same thing. Now we want to go back and we'll set all 5 of these screws in to lock that wedge into place. All right, now we're gonna tighten down all 5 of the screws here to really hold this wedge into place. All right, the last one here. Now, once you do this, your next step would be to repeat that on the opposite side. Now that we've got the bottom knives switched out, now it's time to put the fences back in. As you can see on this fence here, when you flip it over, there's an indentation here. That's where the cutting head goes. That way your knife does not hit the other parts of the fence. So when you put this in, make sure that lines up where it's supposed to. I'm going to slide this into place. Now I've got my notch lined up over my bottom cutting head, and I've got my plate into the groove next to the vertical cutting head. There's the notch straddling the bottom cutting head, and as I rotate here, that knife will miss that. As we move this fence into place, this plate will fit right into that groove. That groove allows this fence to be able to move back and forth. The reason why this is able to be moved back and forth is that's how you adjust the amount of pressure that the pressure rollers apply to the board as it feeds through. Now, depending on the profile that you're running, we would like to typically see about 1/4 of an inch to 1/8 of an inch deflection. Now that we got the fence in place, I'm going to put my bolt back in so we can tighten this down so it will not move on us. Now I cheated a little bit as I put a little mark on my fence because I know where I typically like to run it. I've got a little black line right there, so when I adjust this back right to that point there, I'll know that I'll have the amount of deflection that I want on what I typically run. On the MP260, the way you adjust the amount of material that's removed off the bottom side of the board is done here on this plate here with this series of shims. To remove this plate, you're going to need a flathead screwdriver, and you'll have to loosen 4 screws. Now we're going to remove the top plate. As you can see, we were running with no extra shims in there. With just the top plate alone, you're about a 1/8 removal off the bottom. Once you remove the bottom plate, the MP260 comes with 2 shims. If you stack both shims together and then put the top plate back on, you will bypass the bottom cutter altogether. If you have just the top plate on by itself, you're going to have about a 1/8 removal. And if you stack just one plate up underneath of that top plate, you're going to have about a 1/16 of an inch removal. This plate that has the bevel on it needs to be the plate that the top plate sits on. I'm going to slide in one plate here, so I'm going to set this up for a 1/16 of an inch removal off the bottom plate. So I've got the shim with the bevel in first, and then I'm going to put our top plate back on. And now, put your screws back in. So as I'm tightening this plate up, one thing I like to point out, if you do make adjustments to this plate for the bottom removal, if you have a infeed table connected to your machine, you will have to adjust the height of this infeed table now to match what this surface is. Now we're going to install the fence on the fixed vertical cutting head side. To do this, you're going to need your knife alignment tool that came with your unit. This will allow you to set up for about a 1/8 inch removal off your side cutting head. All right, we're going to slide this fence into place. Now when we do this, you want to make sure that you get all the debris cleaned up from the table. You don't want any debris underneath these clamps that hold this fence down. And we've got a longer bolt that goes into the tall side. And you're going to have a real short bolt that's going to go into the short side. All right, now we're just going to snug these down. We don't want these real tight because we got to make some adjustments to this fence. So when you tighten these up, you want to make sure that you can still be able to move them in and out. Just like that. All right, now we're going to use our knife tool, and we're going to slide this into place here. And this is going to straddle both fences. And this is going to allow us to be able to get to that about 1/8 of an inch removal. Now you want to turn your cutting head so it is at its max distance with that knife out into the table. And we're going to adjust the fence out to meet that and align with the other one. As you set this fence up, if you need to make any micro adjustments, just real small adjustments to your fence, you can use this back dial here You can move it in either direction to make small adjustments to this fence. So you can really fine tune these fences to whatever your needs are. Now we're going to show you how to remove the side cutters on the MP260, and this will also be the same for the MP360, MP200, and the MP180. So on the MP260, when we go and release the adjustable side cutting head, this spindle is reverse threaded. And on the MP360, it's going to be on the opposite side, but the adjustable side cutter on the MP360 is also reverse threaded. So now we got the nut removed here. And then these are going to be your stackable bushings. And this is what your vertical side cutting head looks like. So I'm going to show you now how to release the wedge and take out a straight knife and put a tongue and groove knife in. So we'll take this out by turning it over, putting your Allen wrench, which is a 5mm Allen wrench. Get that in there. Then we're going to break this loose. It's going to allow the wedge to slide out. And then your straight knife is going to pop out just like that. That's an indexable knife, so it only goes in one way. All right, so now I've got my groove profile knife. That's going to insert right into those pins, just like that. And then the wedge is going to insert just in like that, and there's an indentation back there for the grub screw goes to hold it into place. All right, now we're just going to do the same thing for the other side. Now when we go and reinstall this head, now that we have a profile in it, we're going to need some different bushings to stack up here. So typically on the standard tongue and groove profile that Wood-Mizer offers, we're going to go ahead and drop it down to just one of the big bushings there. Now this is adjustable depending on how thick your T&G is going to be. And if you need fine-tuned adjustments, we do have different series of shims that you can do for small adjustments. Slide that into place. Then we take our leftover bushings and we'll stack them back up. And then we'll screw the top nut back down. Like that, and then we'll tighten her up and it'll be ready to go. Now that we have our groove profile installed, as you see as I'm spinning here, this particular head will actually spin clockwise. And you want to make sure when you have your knives into this head that the hard edge will be turning directly into the wood. On the MP260 and the MP360, the side cutting heads do spin in opposite directions of each other. This is the MP260, and on the adjustable side cutting head, this unit here is going to rotate clockwise, and on the fixed side, this one is going to rotate counterclockwise. So you need to make sure that you get your cutting heads installed in the right direction when you take them off and put profiles or just add new straight knives to your cutting heads. You got to make sure that you get them back on in the proper directions. I want to show you how to install a profile knife into the top cutting head on an MP260. Now this will be the same on an MP200 and an MP360. We've got our wedge, and we're going to take a profile knife. As you can see, we've got the notches in the wedge, and we've got the holes cut out in the knife, so it only fits in one way. It's going to meet up just like that. And then when we come to our top cutting head, there's an indentation here where the bolt will slide right into the head, just like that. And then you can slide it down to adjust it anywhere in the cutting head depending on the profile that you're using. Now with the profile we're using here, I was setting up to do crown molding, so when you look on the cutting head you'll see a whole strip of lines here, and you'll use those lines to line up your profile knives. I'm going to set this at about 8 lines over. So right about there is where I want that. I'm going to take our 10mm wrench that came with the unit. Now that we have the first profile knife installed, we're going to rotate the head to the open wing on the opposite side. As you see, as I rotate this, we are leaving the straight knives in, as they do not need to come out when you have profile knives in, as the profile knives extend further than what the straight knives do. So those will stay in. We'll rotate here to our open wing here, and we'll take our wedge and our knife. We'll get them onto the pins, just like that. And we'll drop that down in. And then we will then count 8 lines over. Right there, so that way it'll match up to the one on the opposite side. Now we'll take our 10mm wrench and we'll tighten this one down as well. All right, now that I've got this moved over 8 lines down, I'm now going to tighten this wedge into place. Now we have both profile knives installed on the top cutting head. As I spin it here, you see there's the second one there, and they're right in line with each other, and we still have our both straight knives installed as well. Now I'm going to show you how to adjust the pressure on the feed rollers. Now the feed rollers on the MP200, MP260, and the MP360 are all the same, but on the MP360, the adjustment will be done on the top instead of on the bottom. All right, to check the amount of pressure that you have on your feed rollers, you can simply grab here and you can pull up and you can see how much tension is on each side. As you can see on this side here, it's quite light compared to what it's over here. But please note, on the side where the chains and the feed motor hook to, it's going to be heavier as the sprockets hook onto these feed rollers on that side. Now on the MP360, the adjustment we're going to do is going to be at the top of this block. As you can see on the MP260 and the MP200, it's going to be down here at the bottom where that rod is with the spring on it. And as you tighten that nut, it's going to make more tension on this feed roller. Now on the feed rollers, when you're running softer material, you're going to want a little bit softer of pressure on these rollers, and when you're running hardwoods, you're going to want more pressure. What you don't want to have is you have so much pressure on a softwood as when this comes out, your pressure rollers are leaving indentations even after you plane the material. All right, so now I'm going to adjust the nut at the end of that rod to add more tension to this feed roller, and you're going to need a 13mm wrench to make this adjustment. After we give it a couple turns, test it and see how you like it. I'm going to need a couple more turns here. There. Now we're looking about even on both sides. Now I'd like to cover table maintenance. The maintenance on our tables will be the same on all the units as long as it has a cast iron table. Now the main reason we do this is to keep from surface rust from building up on the table, and it also helps with the material feed through the system better. Now there's a couple different applications you can do. I have a dry lubrication here, which is a spray application, or there's also wax-based applications you can do as well. Now if you do have a little bit of surface rust that has built up on your table, a Scotch-Brite pad is all you need, and you rub it just a little bit and that surface rust will come right off, and then you put your wax or you'd put your dry lube on the machine. So on this unit here, we don't have a whole lot of surface rust. Actually, there's hardly any at all, but if there was any, all you have to do is take your Scotch-Brite pad, you just do a little rub, and that'll help clean up that table. You don't want to rub extremely hard, but that will take up any bit of surface rust that's on there. And once you've done that, then you can grab your lube, and all you do is do a light coating on it. Now this particular one that I have here, once it dries, it'll actually leave like a powdery substance behind, which is the lubrication that you're going to want. All right, so I put a divider in there so you can kind of see where we have sprayed the lubrication on this side. It's kind of diagonal, so you can see here is where the lubrication is, and this over here is unlubricated part of the table.